Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. I've been wanting to get some tools up on my tool wall here for some time now for a few reasons. One, I'd like a nicer background for my YouTube videos. Two is that I'd like to get the hand tools I use on my workbench closer to my workbench. But there's a certain reluctance to do it because there's a bit of a permanence type feeling to putting them up on the wall, and I'm still collecting tools. But the clutter in my shop has reached a bit of a tipping point, so I really need to get a bit more organized, so I'm going to get some tools on the wall. I've been building these organizers for different things for a little while, and we'll cover some of them, the making of them, and we'll get them up on the wall. I didn't want to do just one big cleat wall, and the spacing is fixed, so they're really kind of inefficient. But I do like them. So below my electrical conduit here, I do have some cleats because I had some existing tool holders. And above that, I have just screwed a big piece of plywood to the wall or into the studs very securely because there's going to be a bit of weight and quite a bit of money hanging up on that wall. And with a sheet of plywood that I can screw to it, most of my tool holders are rectangular or square, so I think I can use that space more efficiently. I've got a couple things mounted already. I have some chisels here on my left, and I've got a couple of hand drills up here on the right. Let's start with the hand drill. I'm never going to be a hand tool only woodworker. When it comes to prepping stock, my bandsaw, joiner, planer, that's the way to go. But I have this little hand drill here, and I have permanently mounted a countersink. And I've always been disappointed by the results when I have this in my cordless drill, but I have it in here, and I get very consistent results because you can do the same amount of cranks every time. But very happy with that, and you can get these cheaply at any antique market. I've got a traditional set of chisels and a Japanese set of chisels and a little hammer hanging there on the end. They are both leaning back a little bit, and they use magnets to keep them in place. Speaking of magnets, I've used them a lot for these tool holders, and when you're buying them, you can buy them in different strengths. There's N32 up to N52. N52 is the strongest, and so I suggest you stick with those. If you need to, you can actually double them up, but once you are thicker than the diameter of the magnet, you're not adding any strength. So let's start going through some of these tool holders and how I made them. I've pretty much stuck to 3 woods for putting these together. I've walnut, cherry, and half-inch ply. For the holders that I have already, I've got planes, scrapers, and saws. So let's start with my hand saws, which is this one here that looks like a shopping cart. The saws are pretty straightforward. They just sit in a block with a kerf cut into it, and the handles rest against a dowel that I mounted at an angle, just with a block of wood, and I wrap the whole thing in walnut to hide the plywood edges. The pull saws are pretty similar. I've got a kerf here and a block of wood that's big enough that it fits the backing on the blade, and I've got some magnets to help hold it in place. And for the base to hold the bottom of the handle, I just use a Forstner bit on a block of wood, and I wrap this one in cherry. For the spoke shaves and scrapers, it's a little different. Since both sides are the same, I started out by screwing a couple boards together. I laid out my tools how I wanted them arranged. I transferred my measurements across for height and spacing. I used a straight edge to connect the dots, then my center punch, and then it was off to the drill press. I drilled some holes and laid out a comfortable angle with my bevel gauge, and I think that was about 10 degrees or so. I wanted the holes to be a consistent depth, so I cut it on an angle at the bandsaw. I used my hand plane to clean up the bandsaw marks, my spindle sander, and my 1/4-inch roundover bit on the table router to clean things up. I put the tools in the holder just to get a good idea of spacing between the 2 pieces of cherry. Then I mounted it to a piece of plywood and used my flush trim bit to make it nice and flush. And then I wrapped the whole thing in walnut. But this has been sanded outside and a little final sanding. And with everything that's going up on the tool wall there, I'm just giving it a coat of pure tug oil, and I thinned it out with a little bit of citrus. For my block planes, I just have some dowels here at an angle, and I just cut some little wedges here to match that angle so they sit flat against the back. I separated the holders for my number 7 and number 5 planes. I don't use the number 7 that often, only to flatten the workbench, but they're both quite similar that they have this little holder back here for the sole of the plane to slide into for a bit more security. And the number 7 is so long, I have a couple of magnets up here also to hold it steady. They also sit at an angle when they're on the wall. And the till for the number 4s is also a little different. I wasn't able to capture the back of the sole in the base, so I had to do it a little differently. I started out by tracing the heel of each plane on a piece of walnut and then cutting out with a coping saw. I cleaned it up on the spindle sander, and then I used some popsicle sticks and playing cards to make sure there was an even amount of spacing between the sides of the planes and the little strips of wood. I pin nailed the little pieces of wood in there, although I think I might have gone a little overboard with the playing cards and popsicle sticks. A little trim on the table saw to cut the board to width and height. To get this to lean an appropriate amount back so I didn't have to worry about any planes falling out, I grabbed a 4-inch wide piece of cherry, the same length of the till, and then I cut it diagonally on the bandsaw. I cleaned it up with a hand plane, and then I glued and screwed it to the till. I didn't want all this weight hanging off a couple of screws and wanted to support it from the bottom as well, so I cut a piece of cherry on my crosscut sled to slide onto the base of the till. I cut it to length and then used a guide bushing to drill through the piece I just made and the saw till, and then glued it all together with a couple of dowels. Rather than trying to get everything laid out on this vertical surface, which would be difficult, it's about the same size as the outfeed table on my table saw. So I will try to get everything arranged over there before mounting it to the wall. I've lost one of my pull saws. Found it. I made some good progress today, and I have some space left, which is good because I want to add some layout tools. This is where I currently keep my layout tools, or at least some of them. I made this frame like 10 years ago, and it's hanging on a cleat here. Ow! Start over. Right behind my table saw. As I've gathered tools, they've just sort of accumulated here on the bottom. So I'm trying to clear this area because I want to put a miter saw station here. And it would be awkward to reach these. So some of this stuff I just never use. Mostly the top half of this. These big framing squares, I don't need them. One, they're not that accurate. And two, if I'm breaking down material, I don't need to be that accurate, and I don't need to use those. So those can go live somewhere else. These layout tools, I do use them quite a bit, and I'd like to move them over to the workbench. 1, 2, 3 blocks, I use them a lot, but on the table saw. So what I need to do is accumulate the stuff that's going to be used over by the workbench, start accumulating it over there, and see what I can organize. I've already started making some new holders for stuff. And I've got my piece of ply here. I just don't know if I'm going to go horizontal or vertical. If I go horizontal, I'll have a bit of space above it for something else. But if I go vertical, that'll probably be it. So I think I want to leave a bit of extra room. So I'm going to continue with making these and check back with you later. I do have some space left over above the layout tools, but I think I'm just going to leave that space available for now. I do have a brace and bits that I could put up there, but I've actually never used them, and I'm not sure I'll ever be that much of a hand tool woodworker that I'm going to give up my cordless drill. I do have some hand planes that could go up there that I occasionally use, but I think I'm just going to leave it available for the time being. So let's have a look at what I've got on my cleat wall. First up, I just have boxes. They're very handy for catching just random stuff, glues, tape measures. And I originally started doing finger joints, but I've been wanting to practice my dovetails, so I'm making them out of dovetails now. These are just leftover bits of slabs, and I drilled a bunch of holes in it, and they're a bit of a catch-all. This is just another dovetail one that holds all my glues, and I made this little thing, which is quite handy. Just pops in there and opens your glue. Hopefully you've got a couple ideas of what to do with your tool wall. Doing this project has brought a little bit more organization to the shop, so I'm very happy with it. If you have any questions, please list them down below, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.